Hi, everybody. This is Lowell, and we're talking about basic sound system design or the basics of sound system understanding. And we're talking about microphones, and I wanted to just finish up the discussion about microphones, talking about the applications of various kinds of microphones. And um, most everybody has seen dynamic microphones like the Shure SM57 or 58. The 58 is the one that it looks like an ice cream cone, very rugged. Um, that's a really popular and common mic, and but there are a lot of other microphones. There's just many really good uh, microphones that are available these days, and I just have a couple here that I have around at the house. This is a condenser, but it's multi-patterned. It's an AKG, and so normally condensers are omnidirectional. This one actually can have a polar pattern around this side and around this side, as well as omnidirectional. And so it's a large diaphragm condenser. And so what that does is it causes uh, a wide frequency uh, gathering, uh, but it's also very flat. It's a very natural sounding frequency response. And so this is good for a lot of applications. Um, you might use this for, um, like a podcast with, natural voice in a studio. It's really good for studio work, vocal recordings. You can use it for instruments. We've used this to record string quartets and that type of thing. It's a very natural and nice sounding microphone. And then here is another kind of condenser, but it's a uh, small diaphragm condenser, and this is used to put on a violin. It's a DPA mic, specially designed for close miking, and so it's called a hypercardioid. So you can kind of bend this down, attach it to the instrument, and get a close miking. So it does reject it rejects sound from a wide range, and it's a little more directional, but it is a condenser, so it gives you kind of the combination of directionality um, plus rejection of other sounds that are coming in. A lot of times when you're using condensers, you end up having problems with feedback because if you're doing live use of microphones, then you have your loudspeakers, and the louder you get a condenser mic on stage, the more prone to feedback it is. So um, but that being said, you do want to be able to grab large groups of people like a choir. Normally with a choir, you would use a condenser type of microphone with some directionality. Um, an orchestra, same. You might want to use a condenser for different sections. Uh, for more rock uh, things, you would use, like for a drum set, you would use close miking for your individual instruments. But then if you wanted to capture the whole set with overhead mics, then you would use more of a condenser type. So the close miking would be dynamic mics, like a lot of people use. Just very simply, it's a very cheap solution, but they'll use a Shure SM57 on the snare. It's everybody has their preferences, but that's been a standard for many years. And then you'll have, for overhead miking, like an AKG 414 or something of that nature, to gather all of the cymbals in the whole set. But then for guitar amps, you might want to, most likely you're going to use something like a dynamic type of mic. Many electric guitar players are very specific about the kind of tone that they want, so that's going to vary. But essentially, you're going to want to mic the amp in a certain place to where, and normally that's going to be with a directional mic. Um, Not always, but those are some various applications. Vocal, if you're using vocals on stage, you're going to want, and they're out front. A lot of problems you have with vocals on stage is they're very close to where the loudspeakers are hung, and so they're standing either right um, directly under the loudspeakers or very close to the front of the stage. And so if they're interacting with the audience, then you're going to want them to have a directional mic that rejects the sound so that you don't end up having feedback from your main system. So any kind of directional cardioid type of pattern from a dynamic mic would be great for on stage. But then in the studio, you're going to want to have a very natural sound that you can control and manipulate in post production. So those are several ideas in terms of how choosing the right microphone can be beneficial. It really is strategic, and just to kind of put a cap on the discussion of microphones, there's many different applications and styles of microphones, but essentially you have these two extremes. You have the essentially unipolar or cardioid type of frequency response of a cardioid mic or of a dynamic mic versus a condenser mic, which is omnidirectional. So it's directional versus omnidirectional. The polar pattern is either focused and rejecting all the sound around it, or you want to grab in a very natural acoustic way, natural sounding balanced frequency response with a condenser mic, but it is prone to feedback, so they're harder to use in live applications. So in a very generally comprehensive statement, dynamic mics are better to use in live applications, and condenser mics are better to use in studio applications, where you're not using loudspeakers, you're just capturing the sound and then using it for post-production. And then in between those two worlds, you would call it a hypercardioid, like this DPA that I just showed you. This right here. This is generally meant for live application. It does lend itself to some feedback problems if you really boost it in a live application, but is very nice sounding in a live application. It also sounds very nice in a studio application. So it's kind of a hybrid between those two worlds of dynamic versus condenser. And so it is a condenser, but it's a directional condenser. So I'm not an expert on all of this, but I've used a lot of these and have experienced success and failures with all of these different kind of miking scenarios. And so if you are going to be using a condenser mic in a live application, I would really encourage you to be careful about feedback. But that's a general, I guess, discussion, comprehensive discussion about microphones.